The dust from Captain Harrington's boots hadn't even settled when Sarah Mitchell realized her entire world was about to collapse, standing in the scorching Montana Territory sun of 1876 with nothing but a carpetbag and the clothes on her back after he'd just ordered her off the army settlement for the crime of being a woman without a husband. Sarah's hands trembled as she watched the captain's broad back disappear into the command building. The same man who had smiled at her father during Sunday dinners now treating her like vermin to be swept away. Her father, Lieutenant James Mitchell, had died 3 weeks ago from pneumonia, and the Army had wasted no time deciding that his unmarried daughter had no right to remain on military land. She was 22 years old, educated, capable, and completely powerless against the United States Army's regulations. "You have until sundown, Miss Mitchell," the captain had said, his voice cold and administrative. "This settlement is for military personnel and their families. You are neither." The words had hit her like physical blows. She had grown up on this settlement, had taught the children of soldiers in the small schoolhouse, had nursed sick wives through difficult winters, had been part of this community for 8 years. None of it mattered. The rules were clear, and Captain Harrington enforced them with mechanical precision. Sarah looked around the settlement that had been her home, watching soldiers' wives avert their eyes as they passed, too afraid to show sympathy lest they be associated with her predicament. Only Martha Brennan, the quartermaster's wife, dared to approach, pressing a small cloth bag into Sarah's hands. "It's not much," Martha whispered, glancing nervously toward the command building. "Some cornbread and dried beef. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I tried speaking to the captain, but he wouldn't hear it." "Thank you, Martha." Sarah forced a smile, though her throat felt tight. "You've been a good friend." "Where will you go?" Martha's eyes were red-rimmed, her voice breaking. Sarah had no answer. The nearest town, Helena, was 40 miles south, but she had barely enough money for a week's lodging, let alone passage there. Her father's meager savings had gone to pay his debts. She had no family, no prospects, and now no home. "I'll figure something out," Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I always do." But as Martha hurried away, Sarah felt the weight of her situation crushing down on her shoulders. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction, beautiful and merciless. The summer heat shimmered off the packed earth, and mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels, indifferent to human suffering. She walked slowly toward the small cabin she had shared with her father, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, the space was already stripped of military property. They had taken the bed frames, the government-issued blankets, even the lanterns. All that remained were her few personal possessions and her father's books, which the Army had no use for. Sarah packed methodically, though her hands shook. 2 dresses, her mother's cameo brooch, her father's Bible, a few books, writing supplies. Everything fit into the carpet bag in a small trunk. 22 years of life reduced to objects that could be carried by one person. She was securing the trunk's leather straps when she heard heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. For a moment, hope flared that someone had changed the captain's mind, but it was only Private Morrison, barely 18 and looking desperately uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I've been ordered to escort you to the settlement boundary," he said, unable to meet her eyes. "The captain wants to ensure you're off military land by sundown." "Of course he does," Sarah said quietly. She wanted to be angry, to rage against the injustice, but she was too exhausted. "Give me a moment, please." She took one last look around the cabin, remembering her father sitting by the fire reading, his glasses perched on his nose, his gentle voice explaining military history or poetry or whatever subject had captured his interest that day. He had been a scholar forced into a soldier's life by circumstance, and he had raised Sarah to be independent, educated, and strong. But all the education in the world couldn't change the fact that she was a woman alone in a territory that had no mercy for such circumstances. "I'm ready," she said, lifting her carpet bag. Private Morrison grabbed the trunk, and together they walked through the settlement toward the main gate. Soldiers stopped their work to watch her pass. Some looked sympathetic, others simply curious, as if she were an unusual sight rather than a person being cast out. Sarah kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The gate loomed ahead, its wooden beams stark against the bright sky. Beyond it lay the open territory, the dirt road cutting through grassland toward distant mountains. Sarah had traveled this road many times with her father, always knowing they would return to the safety of the settlement, Now she was leaving with no return, no safety, no certainty. Private Morrison set her trunk down just beyond the gate. "I'm real sorry, Miss Mitchell," he said, his young face troubled. "This isn't right." "No," Sarah agreed, "it isn't. But thank you for your kindness, Private." He nodded and retreated quickly, as if her misfortune might be contagious. The gate closed behind him with a definitive thud, and Sarah stood alone on the road, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. She assessed her situation with forced calm. Helena was too far to reach on foot before dark, and the road was dangerous for a woman traveling alone. Bandits, wild animals, and hostile encounters were common enough that even armed men traveled in groups when possible. Her only option was to find shelter nearby and hope for morning to bring opportunity. About a mile from the settlement, she remembered an old trading post her father had mentioned, abandoned years ago when its owner had died. It wasn't much, but it would provide walls and a roof for the night. Sarah adjusted her grip on the carpet bag, dragged the trunk a few feet, then returned for the bag. It was going to be a long, exhausting journey, even for just a mile. She had managed perhaps a quarter mile when she heard the sound of a horse approaching from behind. Sarah's heart hammered as she turned, expecting trouble. Instead, she saw a single rider leading a pack mule, moving at an easy pace. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. Long, dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. He wore buckskin pants and a worn leather vest over a cotton shirt, with a rifle resting across his saddle and a hunting knife at his belt. Everything about him spoke of the mountains, of wild places and self-reliance. He was perhaps 30 years old, his face weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged, unpolished way. The mountain man slowed his horse as he approached, his dark eyes taking in Sarah's situation with a glance that missed nothing. The carpet bag, the trunk, the fresh tracks leading from the settlement gate, her obvious exhaustion and distress. "You're a long way from anywhere to be traveling alone, miss," he said, his voice deep and rough from disuse, as if he didn't speak often. There was no threat in his tone, only observation. "I'm managing," Sarah said, though even she could hear how unconvincing that sounded. He looked at her for a long moment, then at the settlement gate behind them, then back to her. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding or perhaps recognition of an injustice he'd seen before. "Army kick you out?" he asked bluntly. Sarah's first instinct was to deny it, to preserve some dignity. But what was the point? "My father died. I'm not military, so I have no right to stay on the settlement. Captain's orders." The mountain man's jaw tightened, and something dark flashed in his eyes. "Harrington? You know him?" "Know of him. He's got a reputation for following rules so hard he forgets there's people on the other end of them." He swung down from his horse with easy grace despite his size, landing lightly on his feet. "Where are you headed?" "Helena, eventually. Tonight there's an old trading post about a mile up the road. I thought I might shelter there until morning." He shook his head. "That place collapsed 2 winters ago. Roof's gone, walls are unstable. You'd be better off sleeping under the stars, except there's a bear with cubs been spotted in this area. Game warden at the settlement mentioned it yesterday." Sarah's stomach dropped. She had no other plan, no other options. The enormity of her situation threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. The mountain man studied her face, seeming to read her desperation. "My name's Cole Barrett. I've got a cabin about 3 miles north, up in the foothills. You're welcome to shelter there tonight. Figure out your next step come morning." Every warning Sarah had ever heard about trusting strange men in the wilderness flashed through her mind. But as she looked at Cole Barrett, taking in his steady gaze and the quiet competence that seemed to emanate from him, her instincts said he was offering help without expectation of payment or exploitation. Besides, what choice did she have? A bear with cubs, a collapsed trading post, or trusting this mountain man? "That's very kind," Sarah said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. I'm heading there anyway." He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing, securing it to the pack mule with practiced efficiency. "You can ride the horse. It's getting dark and you're already exhausted." Sarah wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own, but her feet ached and her arms trembled from dragging the trunk. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Thank you, Mr. Barrett," she said quietly. "I appreciate your help." "Just Cole," he said, offering his hand to help her mount. His palm was calloused and rough, his grip strong but careful, and Sarah felt a strange flutter in her chest as she settled into the saddle. She told herself it was just gratitude, just relief at finding unexpected help in a desperate situation. Cole took the horse's reins and began walking, leading both animals north toward the foothills. Sarah watched his broad back, the way he moved with confidence through the landscape, and wondered what circumstances had brought a man like him to the Montana wilderness. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, more to break the silence than from curiosity. "About 6 years," Cole said. "Came up from Colorado, did some trapping, some hunting, some guiding, found a good spot and decided to stay." "Alone?" He glanced back at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Alone." The finality in his tone suggested a story he had no intention of sharing, so Sarah let the silence return. They traveled through grassland that gradually gave way to scattered pines and rocky outcroppings. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, and the sounds of the settlement faded behind them, replaced by wind through trees and the call of distant birds. The sun touched the mountain peaks, turning the sky gold and orange when Cole's cabin came into view. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by pines, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A creek ran nearby, its water clear and fast-moving. It was simple, isolated, and surprisingly well-maintained. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, meaning it. Cole shrugged, as if beauty were beside the point. "It's solid. Keeps the weather out." He helped Sarah down from the horse, his hands steadying her when she stumbled, her legs stiff from the ride. For a moment they stood close enough that she could smell pine and leather and wood smoke on him, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Then he stepped back, creating distance. "I'll get you settled inside," Cole said, already moving toward the cabin with her trunk. "There's a spare room. It's not fancy, but it's clean." The interior of the cabin surprised Sarah. She had expected rough bachelor quarters, but while the furnishings were simple, everything was neat and well organized. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area beside it. A handmade table and chairs sat near the window, and shelves held supplies, books, and various tools. The spare room contained a bed with a real mattress, a small dresser, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. "This is wonderful," Sarah said, setting her carpetbag on the bed. "Much better than I expected." Cole's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "What did you expect? A cave?" "Something like that," Sarah admitted, and was rewarded with an actual smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and less guarded. "I'll get a fire going and make some supper," Cole said. "You must be hungry." Sarah was starving, she realized. She hadn't eaten since morning, too anxious about the captain's ultimatum to manage more than coffee. "Can I help?" Cole looked surprised, as if the offer were unexpected. "If you want, I've got venison stew that just needs heating, and I can make some cornbread." They worked together in the small kitchen area, falling into an easy rhythm despite being strangers. Sarah sliced vegetables while Cole tended the fire and prepared the cornbread. He moved with economical grace, no motion wasted, completely at home in his environment. Sarah found herself watching him, fascinated by the contrast between his rough appearance and the care he took with simple tasks. "How long were you on the settlement?" Cole asked, stirring the stew pot. 8 years. We came when I was 14 after my mother died. My father thought military structure would help him cope with the loss." Sarah's voice caught slightly. "It did, I suppose. He found purpose in his work, and I found community. Or thought I did." "Community only lasts as long as it's convenient," Cole said, a bitter edge to his voice. "I learned that the hard way." Sarah wanted to ask what he meant, but the haunted look in his eyes stopped her. Everyone carried their own pain, their own reasons for choosing isolation over society. She had no right to pry into his. They ate at the table as twilight deepened outside the windows. The stew was excellent, rich and flavorful, and the cornbread was perfectly golden. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this hungry, this grateful for a warm meal in a safe place. "This is delicious," she said. "Thank you, Cole, for all of this. You've been incredibly kind to a stranger." Cole looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. Anyone decent would do the same. In my experience, most people look away when someone needs help. It's easier that way. Sarah met his eyes across the table. You didn't look away. Something passed between them, a moment of connection that felt deeper than circumstances warranted. Cole broke the gaze first, standing to clear the dishes. You should get some rest, he said. Morning will come early and we need to figure out what you're going to do. The weight of her situation came crashing back, the brief respite of the meal forgotten. Sarah had nowhere to go, no prospects, no plan. Helena might as well have been 1,000 miles away for all the difference it made. I'll figure something out, she said, echoing her words to Martha, still not believing them. In the spare room, Sarah changed into her nightgown and lay on the surprisingly comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling beams visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. She could hear Cole moving around the cabin, the creak of floorboards and the settling of the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind churned with worries and worst-case scenarios, with anger at Captain Harrington and the Army's callous indifference, with grief for her father and the life she'd lost. She must have eventually slept because she woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Pale morning light filled the room, and birds sang outside the window. For a disoriented moment, Sarah couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 practical dresses, pinned up her honey-colored hair, and emerged from the room to find Cole at the stove, managing a skillet with the same competence he brought to everything. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Coffee's ready and breakfast will be done in a minute." "You didn't have to make breakfast," Sarah said, pouring herself coffee from the pot on the table. "I was making it anyway. Didn't take any extra effort to add another portion." They ate in companionable silence, the morning light growing stronger outside. Sarah knew she needed to discuss her plans, to stop imposing on Cole's hospitality, but she had no idea what to say. Every option seemed impossible. Cole seemed to sense her anxiety. He finished his coffee, set down his cup, and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully, "about your situation." Sarah's stomach tightened. "I know I need to move on. I'll head toward Helena today. Maybe I can find work along the way, save up enough for passage." "That's a fool's plan," Cole said bluntly. "You'd be lucky to survive a week on the road alone, and even if you made it to Helena, what then? You think there's easy work for a woman with no connections? You'd end up in a saloon, or worse." Sarah flinched at the harsh truth. She knew he was right, but hearing it stated so baldly hurt. "Then what do you suggest?" "I can't stay here indefinitely. You've already done more than enough." Cole stood and walked to the window, looking out at his land. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, and Sarah had the sense he was wrestling with a decision. "There's another option," he said finally, not turning around. "About a mile from here, there's a parcel of land. 20 acres, good water, decent soil. It's not claimed by anyone because it's off the main routes and most people don't know about it. I've got the mining claim papers for the area, legal and registered. The land's mine by territorial law." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "I don't understand." Cole turned to face her, his expression serious. "I could give you that land. Sign over the deed, make it legal. Then you'd have property and the Army couldn't touch you. No one could force you off land you owned outright." Sarah stared at him, unable to process what he was suggesting. "You would give me 20 acres? Just like that? Why would you do such a thing?" "Because what happened to you was wrong," Cole said, his voice rough with conviction. "Because the Army has no right to throw a woman out with nothing, because some captain decides to follow rules without mercy. Because I can help, and I'm in a position to do it." "I have no way to pay you," Sarah said, her mind reeling. "I have almost nothing." "I'm not asking for payment. The land's not doing me any good just sitting there. At least if someone's on it, it serves a purpose." Sarah's eyes stung with sudden tears. The generosity, the unexpected kindness from a man who owed her nothing was overwhelming. "I don't know what to say. This is beyond generous. It's life-changing." "Then say yes," Cole said simply. "Let me do this thing." Sarah thought about refusing, about pride and independence, and not being a charity case. But pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, and this wasn't charity. It was a lifeline. It was the difference between survival and slow destruction. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, thank you. I'll find a way to repay you somehow. Don't worry about repayment. Just build a life." Cole's expression softened slightly. "Come on, I'll show you the land." They walked through the woods on a narrow trail, following the creek upstream. The morning was beautiful, cool and fresh, with dappled sunlight filtering through the pine canopy. Sarah breathed in the clean air, feeling something like hope beginning to kindle in her chest. The land Cole showed her was perfect. It sat in a natural clearing where the creek widened into a small pool, with flat ground suitable for building and gentle slopes covered in grass and wildflowers. Trees ringed the clearing, providing windbreaks and timber. Mountains rose in the distance, majestic and eternal. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "The creek never runs dry, even in late summer," Cole said, pointing out features. "That flat area would be good for a cabin. The soil's rocky but workable if you wanted a garden. There's game in the woods, fish in the creek. You could make a life here." Sarah tried to imagine it, a cabin of her own, a garden, a place that belonged to her and her alone. The dream seemed impossible and yet stood right in front of her, offered by a man who asked nothing in return. "I'll need to build a cabin," she said, thinking practically. "I have some money, but not much. Maybe enough for basic supplies." "I'll help you build it," Cole said. "I've got tools and experience. We can get the frame up in a few weeks if we work together." "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Cole looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "I know you don't know me, and you've got no reason to trust me beyond what I've shown you. But I give you my word, Sarah Mitchell. I'll help you get established here, and I won't expect anything from you except maybe some decent conversation now and then." Sarah believed him. She didn't know why, couldn't explain the certainty she felt, but she trusted this mountain man who had appeared in her darkest moment like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. "Then I accept," she said, offering her hand. "Thank you, Cole Barrett. You've given me back my future." He shook her hand, his grip warm and solid, and smiled that transforming smile that made her heart skip. "Let's go into town tomorrow, get the land transfer registered legally. Then we'll start planning your cabin." The nearest town with a land office was actually a 2-day ride, Cole explained as they walked back to his cabin. They would need to prepare for the journey, which meant Sarah would be staying with him for several more days at least. The prospect should have made her nervous, alone with a man she barely knew, but instead, she felt only gratitude and a strange excitement she didn't want to examine too closely. They spent the afternoon making plans. Cole had paper and pencils, and together they sketched out a basic cabin design. One large room with a sleeping loft, a stone fireplace, a covered porch. Simple but functional, something they could realistically build before winter arrived. "Winter comes hard up here," Cole warned. "We need to get walls and a roof up by October at the latest, which gives us about 4 months. It's tight, but doable if we start soon." Sarah watched him sketch, his large hands surprisingly deft with the pencil, and felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Cole Barrett was handsome, yes, but more than that, he was capable and kind, strong and gentle. He treated her as an equal, asked her opinion on the cabin design, listened when she suggested modifications. "What about windows?" Sarah asked. "Glass is expensive, but I'd love some natural light." "We can use oiled paper for now. Replace it with glass later when you've got more funds," Cole suggested. "That way you get light without breaking your budget." They worked until dark, planning and discussing, and Sarah felt more content than she had in weeks. The grief over her father remained, a constant ache in her chest, but alongside it was something new, possibility, hope, the sense that maybe her life wasn't over, but merely changing direction. That night, Sarah lay in bed listening to the sounds of the wilderness outside her window, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she could breathe. Tomorrow she would begin the journey to making the land legally hers. Tomorrow she would take the first step toward building a new life, and Cole Barrett would be there, helping her every step of the way. She fell asleep thinking about his smile, his strong hands, his steady presence, and told herself it was only gratitude. Nothing more. The journey to the land office took 3 full days, counting travel there and back. They rode through spectacular country, crossing streams and climbing through mountain passes, camping under the stars at night. Cole was an excellent traveling companion, knowledgeable about the land, comfortable in the wilderness, and surprisingly easy to talk to once he warmed up. Sarah learned that he'd grown up in Kentucky, joined the Army at 18, served for 5 years before leaving under circumstances he didn't elaborate on. He had trapped and hunted throughout the Rockies, saved his money carefully, and filed mining claims that gave him legitimate ownership of substantial acreage. He was self-taught in carpentry, leatherwork, and a dozen other practical skills. "Why did you leave the Army?" Sarah asked on the second night, as they sat by the campfire under a canopy of brilliant stars. Cole was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I had a friend, a good man, who got court-martialed for refusing an order he thought was morally wrong. The order involved forcing families off their land without proper compensation, burning their homes to make way for a fort expansion. My friend spoke up, tried to argue for doing it humanely, giving people time to relocate. The captain in charge didn't like being questioned. They made an example of him." "What happened?" Sarah asked softly. "Dishonorable discharge, prison time, reputation destroyed. He'd served 8 years with distinction, and they threw him away like trash because he had a conscience." Cole stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "I realized I couldn't be part of an organization that valued blind obedience over basic human decency. So I finished my enlistment and never looked back." Sarah understood then why he had helped her, why he couldn't walk past someone being treated unjustly by the Army. He had seen it before, had lived with the consequences of military rigidity. "I'm sorry about your friend," she said. "I hope he found a better life." "He didn't," Cole said quietly. "He shot himself 2 months after his release. Couldn't live with the shame of the discharge." Sarah's breath caught. She reached out instinctively, placing her hand over Cole's where it rested on his knee. He looked down at their joined hands, surprise flickering across his face, but he didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "That's heartbreaking." "Yeah," Cole said. "It was, still is." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers, and they sat like that, holding hands by the firelight, sharing grief and understanding without more words. Sarah felt something shift between them in that moment, an intimacy that went beyond circumstances. She was falling for him, she realized with a start. Falling for this quiet, strong man who had saved her and asked for nothing in return, who carried his own pain but still found room for kindness. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt right, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. At the land office, the clerk was efficient and bored, processing the land transfer with bureaucratic indifference. Cole signed over the deed to 20 acres, and Sarah signed her acceptance. And just like that, she was a landowner. She had property, security, a future. "Congratulations, Miss Mitchell," the clerk said, stamping the documents with finality. "You now own 20 acres in the Montana Territory. Don't lose those papers." Sarah clutched the deed to her chest, tears pricking her eyes. "I won't, thank you." Outside the office, Cole smiled at her genuine joy. "How does it feel to be a woman of property?" "Surreal," Sarah admitted. "Yesterday I had nothing. Today I own land. It doesn't seem possible." "It's possible because you deserved better than what happened to you, and someone was in a position to help." Cole's expression grew serious. "You would have survived anyway, Sarah. You're strong enough. This just makes the path easier." "Maybe," Sarah said, though she doubted it. Without Cole's intervention, her path would have likely led to desperation and compromise, trading dignity for survival. But I'm grateful it was this path instead. They celebrated that night at the town's small restaurant, a luxury Sarah couldn't quite afford but Cole insisted on. They ate roasted chicken and potatoes, drank coffee laced with whiskey, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Sarah told him about growing up on various army posts, about her mother's love of literature, about her father's gentle nature. Cole talked about his childhood in Kentucky, about learning to hunt from his grandfather, about the freedom he'd found in the mountains. "Do you ever get lonely?" Sarah asked. "Living alone up there?" Cole considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but I prefer loneliness to bad company. Most people are exhausting, always wanting something or judging you for not fitting their expectations. And me? Sarah asked, emboldened by the whiskey and the warmth in his eyes. Am I exhausting? No, Cole said softly, holding her gaze. You're different. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken feelings. Sarah's heart raced, and she wondered if he might kiss her right there in the restaurant, if she wanted him to. But Cole simply smiled and signaled for the bill, and the moment passed. The return journey seemed both too long and too short. Sarah savored the time alone with Cole, the easy companionship, the growing connection between them. But she was also eager to begin building her cabin, to start her new life. They arrived back at Cole's place in the late afternoon of the third day, both tired from travel but satisfied with the journey's success. Cole helped Sarah unsaddle the horses and unload their supplies, his movements efficient and practiced. We should start gathering materials tomorrow, he said, rubbing down his horse. We'll need a lot of logs, and they need time to settle before we can build with them. I'll help, Sarah said immediately. I'm stronger than I look, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Cole grinned. I believe you. Something tells me you're not afraid of much. They fell into a routine over the following weeks that felt both foreign and natural. Sarah stayed in Cole's spare room but spent her days working alongside him, felling trees, stripping bark, preparing logs. It was brutal, exhausting work that left her muscles screaming and her hands blistered, but she refused to complain or slow down. This was her cabin, her future, and she would build it with her own hands alongside this man who had given her everything. Cole was endlessly patient, teaching her how to use tools, how to measure and cut, how to assess the quality of wood. He treated her as a partner, not a burden, and his respect meant everything to Sarah. The physical work changed her body. Muscles she'd never known existed developed and strengthened. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned by the sun. She felt powerful in a way she never had before, capable and confident. She also grew closer to Cole with each passing day. They worked in harmony, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with looks and small gestures. In the evenings, they cooked together, ate together, talked together. He told her about the mountains, about wildlife and weather patterns, about survival skills. She told him about books she'd read, about teaching children, about her dreams for the future. Sometimes their hands would brush as they passed tools, or their eyes would meet across the campfire, and Sarah would feel that electric connection that pulled toward him, that grew stronger every day. She thought he felt it too, saw it in the way his gaze lingered on her face, in the careful way he maintained distance as if afraid of crossing a line. One evening, about 6 weeks into the building project, they were sitting on Cole's porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The cabin frame was up on Sarah's land, a skeleton that would soon be filled in with walls and a roof. They were ahead of schedule thanks to long days and hard work. You've been quiet today, Sarah observed, studying Cole's profile. Something on your mind? Cole was silent for a long moment, his expression troubled. Finally, he said, I've been thinking about when your cabin's finished, about what happens then. Sarah's stomach tightened. What do you mean? You'll move into your own place, start your own life, which is how it should be. That was always the plan. Cole looked at her, his dark eyes intense. But I'm going to miss you, Sarah. These past weeks, having you here, working beside you, it's been good, really good. And when you're gone, the cabin's going to feel empty in a way it never did before. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. It's only a mile away. We'd still see each other. Would we? Cole asked. Or would we drift apart, get caught up in our separate lives until eventually we're just neighbors who nod in passing? Is that what you want? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Cole said, the word rough with emotion. It's the opposite of what I want, but I don't know what I have the right to ask for. Sarah turned to face him fully, her heart in her throat. What do you want, Cole? He looked at her for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. Then, slowly, he reached out and cupped her cheek with his hand, his thumb brushing her skin with heartbreaking gentleness. I want you to stay, he said. Not in the spare room, not as a temporary guest. I want you to stay with me, build a life with me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to protect you and provide for you and love you the way you deserve to be loved." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "Cole." "I know it's too soon," he continued, words tumbling out as if he couldn't stop them. "I know we've only known each other a few weeks, and you've been through hell, and you deserve time to figure out what you want without pressure. But I can't let you move into that cabin without you knowing how I feel. I love you, Sarah. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you on that road, exhausted and stubborn and refusing to give up, and every day since then has just made it worse, better, made it more." Sarah laughed through her tears, joy flooding through her. "You think you're the only one falling? Cole, I love you too. I've loved you for weeks now. I was just afraid to say anything because you'd done so much already, given me so much, and I didn't want you to think I was trying to repay you with affection or obligation." Cole's eyes widened. "You love me?" "Yes, you impossible man. I love you. I love your kindness and your strength, your patience and your skill. I love how you treat me as an equal, how you listen when I talk, how you smile when you think I'm not looking. I love everything about you, and I don't want to live a mile away. I want to stay right here with you, if you'll have me." Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and Sarah felt him shaking. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You're sure?" he asked. "This is a hard life up here, isolated, rough. You'd be giving up the possibility of towns, society, an easier path." "I'm sure," Sarah said firmly. "I don't want an easier path. I want this path with you. I want to build a life in these mountains, wake up to this view every morning, work beside you every day. That sounds like everything I could possibly want." Cole kissed her then, finally, and it was everything Sarah had imagined and more. His lips were warm and gentle, his arms strong and secure around her, and she felt like she'd finally come home after a lifetime of wandering. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "We should still finish your cabin," he said, "but maybe we turn it into something else, a workshop, a storage building, a guest cabin for when Martha or other friends might visit." "That's a perfect idea," Sarah agreed. "And Cole, I think we should get married, soon. I want to be your wife, officially and legally. I want everyone to know I chose this, chose you." "Tomorrow," Cole said immediately. "We'll ride into town tomorrow and find a preacher. I'm not waiting another day to make you mine." Sarah laughed, giddy with happiness. "Tomorrow, then." They were married 3 days later in a small church in the nearest town, with the preacher and his wife as witnesses. Sarah wore her best dress with her mother's cameo, and Cole wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Sarah felt a rightness settle over her like a benediction. They spent their wedding night in the town's small hotel, a luxury that felt decadent after weeks of hard labor. Cole was gentle and passionate, patient and intense, and Sarah felt truly cherished for the first time in her life. They made love slowly, learning each other, whispering promises and endearments, and Sarah marveled at how quickly her life had transformed from disaster to joy. The next morning, as they prepared to return to their mountain home, Sarah caught Cole watching her with such open love on his face that her breath caught. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Cole said. "How close I came to riding past you that day, minding my own business, never knowing what I was missing." "But you didn't ride past," Sarah said, moving into his arms. "You stopped, you helped, you gave me everything." "No," Cole said, kissing her forehead. "You gave me everything. You gave me a reason to want more than solitude, a reason to build instead of just survive. You gave me a future worth looking forward to." They returned home as husband and wife, and Sarah felt the word resonate through her, home. The cabin that had been Cole's was now theirs, and she set about making it truly so, adding small touches, rearranging with an eye toward shared space, planting a garden near the creek. They finished building what had been intended as Sarah's cabin, converting it into a workshop and storage space as planned. It stood on land that was legally Sarah's, or Sarah Barrett now, but in practice, their lives and properties merged seamlessly. The summer passed in hard work and happiness. They hunted and fished, preserved food for winter, improved both buildings. Cole taught Sarah to shoot, to track animals, to read weather signs. Sarah taught Cole about literature and poetry, about the wider world beyond the mountains, about softness and affection he'd forgotten how to accept. In August, Martha Brennan appeared at their cabin, riding a borrowed horse and looking both nervous and defiant. Sarah ran to greet her, overwhelmed with joy at seeing her friend. "Martha, what are you doing here? How did you find us?" Martha dismounted and hugged Sarah tightly. "I asked around until someone knew where Cole Barrett's place was. I had to see you, make sure you were all right. I've been so worried since Captain Harrington forced you out." "I'm more than all right," Sarah said, pulling back to show off the simple gold band on her finger. "Martha, I'd like you to meet my husband, Cole Barrett." Martha's eyes went wide. "Husband? Sarah, you've been gone 3 months." "I know, it happened fast, but it's real and it's right. Cole saved me, Martha. He gave me land, helped me build a cabin, and somewhere along the way we fell in love. I've never been happier." Cole appeared from the workshop, wiping his hands on a rag, and offered a polite nod to Martha. "Ma'am, any friend of Sarah's is welcome here." They spent the afternoon catching Martha up on everything, showing her around the property, feeding her lunch. Martha was initially wary of Cole, protective of Sarah, but she gradually relaxed as she saw how happy Sarah was, how well Cole treated her, how genuine their affection clearly was. "I'm glad you found this," Martha said quietly to Sarah while Cole was tending the horses. "I was so afraid of what would happen to you. Captain Harrington refused to discuss you after you left, acted like you'd never existed. It made me so angry." "I was angry too," Sarah admitted, "but now I'm grateful. If he hadn't forced me out, I never would have met Cole, never would have found this life. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things." Before Martha left, she extracted a promise that Sarah would visit her sometimes, that they wouldn't lose their friendship to distance. Sarah agreed readily, though in truth the settlement felt like a different lifetime, a place she'd outgrown. As fall approached and the leaves turned gold and red, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a couple of weeks but wanted to be certain before telling Cole. When she finally shared the news one evening over dinner, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby?" he repeated, his voice full of wonder. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were precious and fragile. "Sarah, that's incredible. We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Cole said, terrified, amazed, grateful. "But yes, happy, so happy." They spent the evening making plans, discussing where the cradle would go, what supplies they'd need, how to prepare. Cole was already planning modifications to the cabin, ways to make it safer and more comfortable for a child. That night, as they lay in bed with Cole's hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. From devastation to joy, from homelessness to having everything she needed, from loneliness to being cherished. "Cole," she whispered into the darkness. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away." Cole pulled her closer, kissing her temple. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for choosing this life, for choosing me. You and this baby are my whole world now." Sarah smiled in the darkness, secure in his arms, and felt complete. Winter came hard to the mountains just as Cole had warned. Snow fell deep and stayed late, trapping them in the cabin for days at a time. But they were well prepared with stocked supplies, plenty of firewood, and each other's company. Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body changing and growing, and Cole treated her like spun glass, constantly worried about her comfort and safety. "I'm not fragile," Sarah protested one afternoon when he refused to let her carry water from the creek. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my woman carrying my baby," Cole said stubbornly. "Humor me, Sarah. Let me take care of you." She did, because arguing was pointless, and because secretly she loved his protectiveness, his constant attention, the way he looked at her like she was performing a miracle. They spent the long winter evenings reading aloud to each other, planning for spring, talking about the future. Cole carved a cradle from pine, his large hands creating something delicate and beautiful. Sarah sewed tiny clothes from fabric they'd purchased in the fall, her stitches careful and precise. In early March, their son was born during a late-season snowstorm. The labor was hard and frightening, with only Cole to help, but he was calm and capable, talking Sarah through each contraction, supporting her when she thought she couldn't continue. When the baby finally arrived, wailing and red-faced and perfect, Cole wept openly, cutting the cord with shaking hands and wrapping his son in blankets Sarah had made. "He's beautiful," Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, he's perfect. You're perfect. You're the strongest person I've ever known." They named him James, after Sarah's father, and he had Cole's dark hair and Sarah's green eyes. Sarah held him to her chest, exhausted and elated, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. Cole sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, looking down at his son with undisguised awe. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A family, a wife, a child. I'd convinced myself I didn't need it, that I was better off alone. But I was wrong. This is everything." "This is everything," Sarah agreed, leaning into his solid warmth. "We're everything." Recovery was slow, and Cole took over all the household duties without complaint, cooking and cleaning and caring for both Sarah and James with patient devotion. He was a natural father, calm with the baby's crying, gentle in his handling, completely unafraid despite his size and rough exterior. As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers, the Barrett family emerged from their cabin into the sunshine. James was 2 months old, healthy and growing, and Sarah felt strong again, ready to resume her life. They worked the land together that summer, with James in a cradle near wherever they were working. They planted a larger garden, improved the workshop, made plans for expanding the cabin. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, hard but deeply satisfying. When James was 6 months old, they made the journey to town to have him baptized. Martha and her husband met them there, exclaiming over the baby and marveling at how happy Sarah looked. "You're glowing," Martha said, hugging her friend. "Motherhood and mountain life suit you." "I'm happy," Sarah said simply, "happier than I ever imagined I could be." At the church, they ran into Captain Harrington. He looked older, more tired, and when he saw Sarah, surprise crossed his face. "Miss Mitchell," he said, then corrected himself as he noticed the baby and Cole's protective stance. "Mrs. Barrett, I presume." "Captain," Sarah said coolly. She felt no anger anymore, only distance. This man had no power over her life now. "I heard you'd landed on your feet," the captain said, and there might have been a hint of relief in his voice. "I'm glad. I did what I had to do, but I didn't wish you ill." "You didn't wish me anything," Sarah corrected. "I was a problem to be solved, a regulation to be enforced. But it worked out. My husband gave me land the Army could never take away, and we've built a good life." Captain Harrington nodded, looking uncomfortable. "I'm pleased to hear it. The Army serves the nation, Mrs. Barrett, but sometimes the rules are inflexible. I hope you understand." "I understand perfectly," Sarah said. "Rules matter more than people to men like you. But I found someone who thinks people matter more than rules, and that's made all the difference." She walked past him without another word, Cole's hand warm on her back, James cooing in her arms. She never looked back. The years passed in a blur of seasons and small moments. James grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious boy, exploring the mountains with his father, learning to track and hunt and survive. 2 years after James, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, who had her father's quiet determination and her mother's quick mind. The cabin expanded as the family grew, new rooms added, improvements made. Cole's mining claims provided modest income through guiding and trading, and Sarah started a small business selling preserves and sewn goods in town. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable and secure. Cole proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, patient with his children, teaching them about the wilderness and life with gentle firmness. Sarah watched him with James and Catherine and fell more in love with him every day. Their 10th wedding anniversary arrived on a perfect summer day. The children were spending the night with Martha's family, giving Cole and Sarah rare time alone. They rode up into the high country, to a meadow filled with wildflowers, and spread a blanket beneath the vast Montana sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked, lying beside her, their fingers intertwined. Giving up the possibility of an easier life? Sarah turned to look at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and built a life with her. His hair was longer now, threaded with silver at the temples. His face was weathered by sun and wind, lines around his eyes from squinting at distant horizons. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Never, she said firmly. Not once, not for a single moment. This life, this family, you. It's everything I wanted and things I didn't even know I needed. You gave me more than land, Cole. You gave me freedom, security, love, purpose. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me the same things, Cole said, pulling her close. I was just existing before you, going through the motions. You made me want to live, to build, to dream. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Barrett. They made love there in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and mountain air, and Sarah felt the same fire, the same connection she'd felt from the beginning. 10 years together, and it only grew stronger. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, talking about the future. James was 7 now, Catherine 5, and they were considering having another child. The cabin could accommodate more, and their hearts certainly could. I want everything with you, Sarah said softly. Every year, every season, every moment. I want to grow old with you in these mountains, watch our children grow, maybe meet grandchildren someday. I want it all. Then we'll have it all, Cole promised, every bit of it together. A year later, their third child was born, another son they named Thomas. James and Catherine adored their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him, help feed him, make him laugh. The cabin rang with noise and chaos and love. Sarah was 34 now, Cole 42, and they had built something remarkable together. Their land was productive and beautiful, their children healthy and happy, their marriage strong and deep. They had friends in town, respect in the community, and security that could never be taken away. Sometimes Sarah would think about that day Captain Harrington ordered her off the settlement, how her world had collapsed in an instant. She was grateful for it now. Strange as that seemed, that destruction had cleared the way for creation, for this life that exceeded anything she could have imagined. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch while the children played in the creek, and Cole would take Sarah's hand, pressing it to his lips in a gesture that had become habit over the years. I love you, he would say, simple and sincere. I love you too, Sarah would respond, meaning it more with each passing year. Their love story wasn't conventional. It had started with injustice and desperation, with a chance encounter on a dusty road, but it had grown into something solid and enduring, built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared dreams. Cole had given Sarah land the army couldn't take away, but more than that, he'd given her a life, a family, a love that nothing could diminish. And Sarah had given Cole the same gifts in return: purpose, connection, joy, belonging. They grew old together in those mountains, watching their children grow and eventually bring home partners of their own, welcoming grandchildren who ran wild through the same forests their parents had explored. The cabin expanded again. Then James built his own place nearby, establishing a family compound that stretched across the land Cole had once claimed and Sarah had once received as an impossible gift. When Sarah was 60, she stood on the porch of the cabin that had been her home for nearly 40 years, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Cole came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. They were both gray now, their bodies marked by years of hard work and mountain living, but their love remained as strong as ever. Any regrets? Cole asked, echoing his question from decades ago. Not a single one, Sarah said, turning in his arms to kiss him. You saved me, Cole Barrett. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Cole corrected, holding her close. We built this life together, every bit of it, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. They stood together as darkness fell, surrounded by the land they'd worked, the family they'd raised, the life they'd built from nothing but determination and love. The mountains rose eternal around them, witness to their story, guardian of their home. In the end, it wasn't about the land, though the land mattered. It wasn't about the army's injustice, though that had been the catalyst. It was about two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had chosen to build rather than merely survive, who had created love and family and legacy from the ashes of loss. Sarah had lost her father, her home, her security, but she had gained a husband, children, grandchildren, and a life filled with purpose and love. The captain had ordered her off the settlement, thinking he was enforcing rules, maintaining order. Instead, he had set in motion a chain of events that led Sarah to her true home, to the man who would love her unconditionally, to the life she was meant to live. Cole had given her land, yes, 20 acres that became the foundation of everything that followed. But more importantly, he had given her himself, his strength, his protection, his devotion. He had seen her when she was invisible, had valued her when she was deemed worthless, had loved her when she felt unlovable. Together they had created something remarkable, not just a family or a homestead, but a testament to resilience, to the power of kindness, to the possibility of joy even after devastation. Their story would be told by their descendants for generations, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that home isn't a place, but the people we choose, and who choose us in return. As they grew older, their routines softened, but their connection deepened. Cole's hair went fully white, and his movements slowed, but his eyes still lit up when Sarah entered a room. Sarah's hands grew arthritic, but they still reached for Cole's at every opportunity. They had lived a lifetime together, and neither could imagine existence without the other. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the compound. James and his wife with their 4 children, Catherine and her husband with their 3, Thomas and his wife with their first baby on the way. The cabin overflowed with people, noise, laughter, and love. That evening, as the celebration continued around them, Cole pulled Sarah away to their old spot by the creek, to the place where her cabin had once been planned, where their future had first taken shape. 50 years, Cole said, shaking his head in wonder. Half a century with you, and it still feels like not enough time. We've been blessed, Sarah said, leaning against him. So incredibly blessed. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for trusting me enough to try, Cole said. That day on the road, when I asked you to come to my cabin, you could have refused. You could have tried to make it on your own, but you trusted me, and that trust became everything. You earned it, Sarah said simply. You've earned it every day since. They stood by the creek as the sun set, the same view they'd watched countless times over 50 years, and it never got old. The mountains remained, constant and eternal, bearing witness to their love story. When Cole died at 76, peaceful in his sleep with Sarah beside him, she grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. They had lived a full life together, raised 3 good children who had given them 9 grandchildren and counting. He had loved her completely until the very end, and she had done the same for him. Sarah lived another 8 years without him, surrounded by family, still strong and sharp despite her age. She spent her final years telling stories to her grandchildren about their grandfather, about the day a mountain man had stopped on a dusty road and changed her entire life, about building a cabin and a family and a legacy from nothing but determination and love. She died at 84, in the cabin she and Cole had shared, in the bed where they'd slept together for decades. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, holding her hands, telling her they loved her, thanking her for everything she'd given them. Her last words were, "Take care of the land. It's more than property. It's freedom. It's security. It's everything your grandfather gave me and everything we built together. Protect it, cherish it, and remember the love that made it home." They buried her next to Cole on a hill overlooking the compound, with a view of the mountains they'd both loved. The headstone read simply, Sarah Barrett, 1854 to 1938, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. But the true monument to her life wasn't carved in stone. It was the thriving family compound below, the land still in family hands, the descendants who carried her strength and Cole's kindness forward into the future. The army had ordered her off the settlement, thinking they were enforcing regulations, maintaining order. But they had actually freed her to find her true home, her true love, her true life. Cole had given her land the army couldn't take away, and together they had built something that would last for generations, not just property, but a legacy of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between two people who chose each other when the world gave them every reason to give up. Their story became family legend, told and retold, embellished and cherished. The mountain man who saved the army officer's daughter, the woman who trusted a stranger and found everything she'd ever wanted. The love that grew from desperate circumstances into something eternal and unshakable. And in the Montana mountains, on land that had been given as a gift and became a foundation, the Barrett family continued to thrive, living proof that sometimes the greatest loves begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that home isn't about buildings or acreage, but about the people who see us, value us, and choose to build a life with us no matter what obstacles stand in the way. Sarah and Cole's cabin still stood a century later, preserved by descendants who understood its significance. Tourists would visit sometimes, drawn by the legend, and the family would tell the story of how it all began, with injustice and intervention, with desperation and generosity, with trust and love. The land remained in family hands, passed down through generations, never sold, never surrendered, a testament to Cole Barrett's gift and Sarah Mitchell Barrett's determination. It was more than property. It was proof that one person's kindness can change everything, that love can bloom in the hardest circumstances, and that sometimes being cast out is actually being set free to find where you truly belong. Their story ended not with death, but with legacy. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren carrying forward their values, their strength, their love. The captain had ordered Sarah off the settlement, but he had actually ordered her into the arms of destiny, into a love story that would be remembered long after regulations and rules were forgotten, into a life that mattered not because of what she lost, but because of what she found and what she built with the mountain man who stopped when others would have passed by, who gave when others would have withheld, who loved when loving seemed impossible. And that, in the end, was everything that mattered.